Jeez, this is annoying. Ugh. Okay, so I haven't gotten any more menu stuff done since. Okay, I haven't gotten any more menu stuff done since what happened on Friday. So it's not much more is filled out, but there's like some small change that you'll have to make after you pull in everything to make things work because of a weird issue with something called the resource folder. Does it sound fine? Or is that too loud?
It sounds like really garbled. Start talking again.
Hello, I am talking. This is my voice talking. Me talking. Talky talk.
So slow. What's it doing?
Talk.
It's really blown out. I have no idea why.
Should I turn the volume down, I guess, then? Or
No, I mean, like, it's not loud. It's just, like, bad.
I can switch USB ports.
Yeah, I would try that.
Is anybody still pulling from master? Does everybody have it set up? Okay, cool. Attach. Okay, I've switched it now, so hopefully it works better. Is it?
Yeah, it's better.
Okay. All right. So to get started, one
Also,
thing.
actually, notch it down just a bit. Whenever you talk loudly, it just doesn't work.
It's because I project.
Well, no, like, it should. Like, when Sean was a bit loud.
Okay.
I don't know what's going on.
All right. This hopefully is good.
I mean, we can use your internal mic if you want to. Somehow.
No, it's fine as long as this is good.
It is decidedly okay.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Thank you for pulling things. So there's one issue that I didn't change yet because I didn't want to have to like make everybody pull again. But you'll notice when you play, it should do it this time. It might not actually do it. But when you play and you click custom play, didn't do it on mine. But there's a chance that when you click play and then custom play, it'll tell you that the scene it's trying to access hasn't been added to the build settings or to the asset bundle. And then the natural thing to do would be to go to the build settings and check and see and add that scene that it's saying is missing. And then, very strangely, it is actually there. And what I'm pretty sure the issue is that I'm using this resources folder to, sort of attach minigames to or be able to access minigames at runtime, and that kind of changes up how resources and assets are loaded. And because the minigame selection scene, which is trying to be accessed, is not it's definitely this.
Yeah, like that's just so strange.
What is it doing now?
No, it's just blown out. Like it's just really bad.
Okay, I can speak more quietly.
No, it's
Anyway, yeah. So the issue is that this, which is where the minigame selection scene is, the one that like you're used to seeing with the list of minigames, is not inside of this resources folder. So if you encounter some error saying that the minigame selection scene is not in there, just drag it into resources. Next time I push changes, I'll have it that way. So yeah. Anyway, so what we're going to get into today is some menuing stuff. I'm going to try to use my existing UI stuff. So it kind of makes more sense, it gives it context to what I'm doing, but I'll try to do it simplified at first at least, because I'm doing some custom complex things with the UI, but I'll do a simplified version of it, and then hopefully if we have time, we can get to like why my why my menu transitions are animated. But I'll go through some really basic things first. I wrote notes on like a piece of garbage paper. It was literally a paper that I failed that I wrote this on. Okay, yeah. So what you're going to do first, if you want to follow along. Oh, actually, before you do that, I recommend making a new branch, just so, because most likely if you're following like what I'm doing right now, this isn't actually going to be something that you would want in the game necessarily, or would want to push. So if you're ever doing some experimental changes, or just like trying to mess around with the code base, but you don't intend on keeping that, it's a pretty good idea to go into your whatever you're using to manage the project in Git, and creating a new branch. And the way you do that is git checkout -b, and the -b is just shorthand for saying I want to make a new branch, and then name your branch. So it could be UI tutorial or something like that. So, yeah. UI tutorial. Okay, cool. And so everything should stay the same. Your scene shouldn't reload unless you had other changes, or your Unity shouldn't reload unless you had any other changes. But now you don't have to worry about like messing up other progress by having to revert a bunch of stuff. Just make sure that once you're done, you switch back to the previous branch that you were doing your actual work on. So anyway, the basics of Unity UI are, so if you're in the main menu scene, which is an assets, main menu, and then main menu, you'll find this, and you'll find in the project hierarchy, the structure of these two prefabs, which are just game objects without any actual mesh or visible aspects to them. And then you'll find this game object called menu items. And you might notice that even though these two, these are what you would call, I guess, empty game objects, they still have transforms. And that's the like XYZ rotation scale, and that's in world space, which is, if I click on this, it'll center in on it, and it's actually located at the world's origin, even though nothing's there. It's just basically a container for information for my purposes. Same thing with the transition controller, but with menu items, the transform here looks different. That's because it's a rect transform. Its rect transform is extended from the base transform, so you do technically have the functionality of a regular transform within the rect transform, but it's got additional things and kind of like a wrapper around it to make it more optimized for UI. So what this base menu items object is a canvas. And you can tell that, at least in this case, by the fact that it has the canvas component on it. A lot of the different UI components are actually, they're somewhat different from a lot of the other like default objects that you get. Well, I guess they're not really different, but essentially they are just a type of game object with different special components attached to this. So this is just a game object with a canvas and canvas scaler and graphic raycaster component attached to it. And what the canvas is kind of self-explanatory. It's the canvas in which you put your UI elements on it. And if I were to do this like without all this custom stuff already put on it, you would do right-click or create in your project hierarchy, go to UI, and then canvas, and it'll generate a canvas for you. It'll also, because I already have all of this prior UI stuff in here, you didn't notice, but whenever you have nothing in a scene and you want to bring in a canvas, it also generates an event system, which is this thing here. Event system is what the Unity UI system uses to understand when a button is pressed or when a UI element is interacted with. So if your buttons seem to not be doing anything, or your UI elements seem to not be doing anything, just double check and make sure you actually have an event system somewhere in the scene. Because in some cases, like if you're trying to create a UI element nested in something else, it won't necessarily automatically create the event system. So that's step one in kind of debugging stuff. I always forget that and will try to debug for a long time, and it's just something as simple as that. So this canvas is blank. There's nothing on it. This arrow that you see here, or I guess if I were to go into this rect tool, which rect tool is just a different kind of like selection option that is works best for the rect transform because you can kind of drag things around. But because this is a canvas and it's set up in its default render mode, which is screen space, I can't actually drag it around. This screen space render mode basically says that the canvas will be whatever size your actual game is. And because I have my game view set to a fixed ratio currently, this will be of like the same resolution as the game mode. So if I were to take this out and put it in free aspect, everything looks really weird, and I will explain why that is in a little bit, but you'll see that whenever I change the shape of the game view, canvas also changes shape, which is generally not good. And if you forget to manage resolutions and then you build your project and the person just has a different resolution or like, yeah, different resolution computer, it could completely mess up your UI. But there are very easy fixes for that, one of which is viewing your game on the resolution that you intend to have it in. If you don't want to get too complicated and make UI for multiple different resolutions, you can just pick one and they'll have to deal with either like a windowed mode or black bars to fit full screen, like the way it is right now. The other thing is, let me just delete this old canvas. The other thing special that this menu items canvas has is I've actually changed up canvas scaler, which I'm pretty sure on the default one is, yeah, so the canvas scaler default has the UI scale mode set to constant pixel size, which basically means it means that whenever you change your game screen size, it'll like, I mean, it intends to keep the pixels to the same size. I don't know how to explain that, I guess.
We changed the resolution to like a fixed one?
Yeah, so, well, I currently have this one at a fixed resolution.
Not there, but like in the game thing. I think it's like constant pixel size. I thought it like stayed the same even if it was like, so like it didn't scale at all. But I'm not sure.
So what it does is, like if I had an element, let me just add an element in here really quick. Add like a panel, maybe like a button, hide all of this stuff for a second, and then change this to free aspect, get out of the way. There you go. So this is on constant pixel size. Oh, it's not gonna let me do it. Okay, hold on. Oh, I can do it like this, I think. Or, like, if I change the game view, you'll see.
Yeah, so it stays the same size.
The elements in it stay like a literal same size, regardless of like how your screen is. And if you change it to scale with screen size, it should
Yeah.
scale down with the resolution of your screen. So if you have a build and then it runs on a desktop application, and like say this person has a really tiny laptop or something, but you were developing without the scale with screen size, what appears this way may end up appearing something like this on their screen, which with a simple single button in the center like this is not a problem. But if you have like buttons along the side or any information that's not in the very center, that could be completely lost to the person. So that's another important thing to keep in mind when you're developing.
With UI scaling, you go back.
Okay, what?
The scale mode, change the scale mode back to scale.
Yeah.
There's like a lot of stuff that you can do here.
Oh, yeah.
You can change reference resolution. You can change the match mode.
Yeah.
So normally most screens scale by width, like unless it's like a phone that's really tall. That's not like that. Like
Yeah, it's for horizontal displays, which are most monitors. You want to scale by width because it's naturally going to be the longer size. So it wants to take that size as the limiting factor, I guess, or
I mean it's not
the limiting factor, but
that is the one that it scales.
Yeah.
Right? As you saw when we changed the width, it scaled the height of the thing down, or like it smushed the thing down.
Yeah.
Along.
This is very confusing to explain, and I'm sure to understand. Like the way I always kind of have to reteach myself this every single time by just like changing the setting and then like dragging the window size.
Just know that it's there.
Yeah, just know that it's there, and it's a common thing that will confuse you when you play or build or change screen resolution. So know that it is an important thing.
Most things you learn, what you're going to do is you're just going to know that it's there. You're not going to remember what it did.
Yeah.
What you're going to do is you're going to mess with it until it works.
Yeah, and so this looks weird now. It's because it's not in 3x2. So I'm currently setting up the UI to work for 3x2, and this reflects in the canvas scaler because it's matching a reference resolution of 900 by 600, and that number is in pixels. So what that means is the game screen space, like this space here, it's understanding all of the UI elements to be 900 pixels across by 600 pixels vertically. And so whenever your canvas is in screen space mode, which it is by default, you can also have it in world space mode, which makes it, it turns these values into world space. Whenever it's in screen space, that's referring to literally like what is the pixels on the screen, which is different from world space. Keep that in mind. And it is also different from viewport space, which I can explain those things as well. You see. Okay, so in the hierarchy of my menu, there is, in UI, I tend to have like a very deep hierarchy just so I can make things nest and scale relatively the way I want them to. So you'll see I have this background, which all it is this image here to give the color to the background. And then I have this container, which, as it says, contains these elements. And these elements being buttons, which are in another container, and then the title. So what is the purpose of having all of these containers? One, it's to change how they scale based on like width and height, and like how you can do certain things. You can set the position of certain UI items kind of automatically based on settings in a parent container. So like these buttons here, I didn't manually make them line up all pretty by like manually changing the numbers. The reason they are set up this way is because the buttons container has a vertical layout group, which I can explain in a little bit. But they're components that make organizing and scaling and moving UI elements around a lot easier.
Actually, I don't know if you guys would have taken 2340 with the Android stuff.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like that.
It's somewhat similar to that, and also the way like HTML elements, some nesting things can work with CSS.
Sort of, yeah. Like it's closer to like the way the Android works, just because it's more cumbersome than HTML and CSS by like 20 times.
Yeah.
But like, yeah. Actually, I mean, I think they're teaching it as Scala now, so actually you guys would.
Oh yeah, you new children. So I'll get into. I've explained the like on the canvas at least, they have this position X, position Y, position Z with height, anchor, pivot. But you'll see on a lot of these inner ones, they have different titles in the rect transform. And that has to do with the anchors, which the way this is organized can be kind of confusing, in my opinion. But so this box here, you'll see it has, stretch, and what that is telling you is the current element you have selected, which I have the background selected, will the numbers you're seeing here are a response or an explanation of how your element is being stretched with relation to its parent. So this is saying the background element will stretch with the parent menu items with some left, top, right, bottom border values of whatever you put in here. So this, you could think of these numbers in this case as margins. So like if you wanted a margin of like 10 pixels on the side, you would just do that, and same for everything all around it. Position Z, we're not going to mess with because we're doing screen space, so we're only looking at the X and Y coordinate system right now. If you were doing something in world space or some weird layering stuff, you might do it a different way, but that's kind of more complicated for what we're covering right now. So I now have this 10 pixel border all the way around the primary canvas for background.
Actually, with the Z. Because I think that affects Z ordering here.
Yes.
Other thing is,
you have different Z ordering things.
I think is the other one.
Yeah. Yeah, so the other thing is you can't really tell because Canvas doesn't have any images on it, but I could add one really quick, I think. Image. So, yeah, children are inherently in front of parents, and also that extends to siblings are ordered by last sibling or bottom sibling is in front of all the siblings above it.
But I think does Z order change? Like, does this?
Yes, you can manually set Z order as well, but we're not going to mess with that right now.
Just note that if there's something behind another thing, just try reordering it or change it as a parent or a sibling, whatever.
Yeah. So anyway, we have this 10 pixel border all the way around. But like, still, that doesn't explain why left, top, right, bottom is here when this is position values, like fixed position values. That's because, one, because the canvas is a special thing and it's being controlled separately. But two, this UI elements, anchors, are set in such a way that it's causing it to be stretched like this. So the reason I say this is kind of confusing is because this right here, like this drop-down kind of thing, and this drop-down are essentially the same thing. One of them is just visual, and one of them is number-based. And also, like, you can't do super custom values here, but these are generally going to be the values you're interested in if you're wanting to anchor your UI element in some way. So what this is also kind of a complicated topic. And something that you'll just want to mess with by changing like where an anchor is, moving elements around, changing their width and stuff. So currently it's stretched, which means it stretches with the parent. But if we were to change this to like fully centered, it looks more like the canvas here with the position X, position Y, and the set widths. And so if I were to set this width more narrow, is this a good thing to show this off with? Okay, let me actually do this with the container. It'll be easier to see what I'm trying to say. And I'll add an image to it so you can see better. All right. So now we're looking at the container inside of background just so I can explain this better. So if we switch this to fully centered, which you'll see whenever you do that. So say we start with stretch and you look at the anchors. This makes the anchor min and max values 0 and 1 for both x and y. And you'll see like graphically, these little points or little like arrow things are on the four corners. And you might be saying like, what the hell is 0 and 1 meaning? Like I thought we were working in screen space. You thought wrong. You're also working in viewport space. And so the anchors are set in viewport space. And that's just saying for the element, the rectangular element I'm looking at, the 0 represents like the zeros represent the origin and the ones.
Percentage.
Basically. Yeah. It's basically percentage size as opposed to pixel size. And also the y is, the graphics coordinate systems change a lot. So in this case also, y being 1 represents the top as opposed to the bottom, which is very confusing.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. Check it. Bam.
That's really dumb.
Yeah, it's really weird. Anyway, so you'll see like all of the four corners have the little points around them. The anchor literal values are 0s and 1s, but if we switch to center, these all become 0.5. And now that I've explained that it's like the percentage location, that makes a lot of sense. It's in the center of 0 and 1. So it's kind of hard to see here, but the little arrow bits are centered on the middle of it. So like I was saying, if we do this and we have like, we can give it like a 20 pixel border now, and then we move the parent of it, which is background. If I were to resize the background, the child container, which is the one we gave a 10 pixel border, is going to maintain that 10 pixel border because it's stretching up until those 10 pixels. But if we do change this to center and then move its parent around, it's not going to do that because we assigned it a fixed width. And so it's not attempting any stretching or, and also it's like going to maintain a central position to the parent. So this is really complicated to explain. So also the anchor is not, the anchor width, or the anchor percentage distance is not in terms of the size of the actual element that it's attached to. So the distance it's referring to, or the 0 to 1 size it's referring to, is the parent, right? Isn't that right?
No, I thought it was.
Is it?
Which anchor? Oh, the anchor that.
Yeah. So.
Might be based on the parent.
Yeah. So you'll see, like, now that I gave it this margin or this border, these arrows are still at the corner points of its parent.
That's because of stretch, though. Right?
Yeah, that is because of stretch.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, like, if you're moving your element based on some value you're seeing in the rect transform here, like left, top, bottom, right, or if you have it even in this mode, this position is being moved, or like this value you're seeing is a combination of reference to the parent's anchor location as well as the element's pivot. So it's very many levels of annoying complication with positioning things.
Again, note that this is not, you don't need to remember this specifically because you're probably just not going to just understand that
Yeah.
these things exist and you mess with them and then it works.
Yeah, a lot of it's trial and error, wiggling things around. But yeah, so we have the center, and when we resize the parent, it sticks to the center of the parent. So you'll see like the parent is like this right here, and it's moving to the center of that. And if we were to change this to be pinned to the corner maybe instead, so now it's anchored to the parent's corner, the top left corner, you can see it right here. And if we resize the parent from the left, you'll see it's still maintaining its size, but now it's moving in accordance with the top left corner. And if we were to resize it from the right, it's still maintaining its size, but it's not moving at all because we're not moving the top left corner. And then there's like middle ground options between being pinned to a corner or stretching. You can stretch along certain axes. So like here, you can stretch along the top. So now when you do it, it'll, the element will change its width, but it will not change its height. So it'll have a fixed height, but not a fixed width. And then the alternative of that is also the case. And then you can also just pin to an entire axis and not have any like reactive position or reactive size changing, which you would do with this, like if you wanted to fix it to the top this way. Is that right? Did I do that right? Oh wait, no. Oh, wait.
Also, since it's 5:40, you should probably move on to like.
Yeah, anyway, okay. I just wanted to cover this because it's, I don't know. I always get stuck on stuff like this. Okay, and I'll cover pivot really quickly. This is more of the actual elements center point that you want it to pivot on. It does relate to the position stuff too, of course. You can see that whenever I move it, the position it's referring to is changing. So if I had, currently, its pivot is around its actual center, so if I were to change its rotation or something, it'll pivot along that. If I change it to like a corner, it'll pivot along that corner, and it'll also adjust its position along that corner. But generally I keep that centered most of the time. So what can we actually do to make things interact with each other? Well, I messed that up, hold on. Container, new component, let me fix these. And that, and I think I had it like that. Okay, so what can we actually do in this menu? You'll see I already have some menu button interactions set up, and you can look at them. They have, the code associated with them is somewhat complex, so I'll actually do a simplified version of what I was doing with the settings, so we can create a settings button. And what it currently does with what I have set up is basically nothing. When you click on it, it does an out animation, but there's nothing in the settings. And I'll actually make this even more simplified so you guys can follow along and get the basic understandings of how button interactions work. So if you open the buttons container and you go to the settings, this is a button. This is a TextMesh Pro button. And if you go to the inspector, you'll see in the button script, there's something already in onClick, which is my custom button animation kind of thing. And what I would like you to do, if you would like to follow along, is swap that out for this. Actually, let me rename this menu container, or main menu container rather. Menu container. Yeah, so swap this value right here out with by dragging in the main menu container into that spot. And what that is doing is saying, okay, whenever I click on this button, I want you to do something that is available to me inside of this object. Whether it's a script, whether it's like reference to something in its components, I want access to this object and I want to do something to it. And what you want to do with it is click on the function selection and then go to game object and go to set active and leave it unchecked. So basically what this is saying, whenever I click on the settings button, I want my main menu container to be made inactive. So if we test this, it'll be similar to what you saw before, but it won't have the animation. But that's just to show you can do essentially the same thing I was doing without custom scripting. You can just drag a button in, and you're always going to have the game object functions available to you, and you'll always be able to set something active or inactive with a button press. So now we still don't have anything showing up. So what we can do now is inside of background, like alongside the main menu container, is create an empty. And this will automatically initialize a game object with the correct, with a rect transform as opposed to a regular transform. We can set this to stretch and then make it stretch all the way to the edges and rename it something like settings container. And just so we can make sure that it's like our menu will appear, or like we can tell from doing the button presses that we're actually in a new menu, inside of the settings container, create a text mesh pro. Text Mesh Pro is just a better text system than the default Unity text system. It's just better, and then we can just name this like settings title. And currently it's in the center, you can't really see it. We can also just name this settings. I'm going to mess with some of the cool settings available to me here, and that would be, I'm going to make the text bold, I'm going to make it italic, and I'm also going to make it all caps, which is really neat, but you still can't see it because there's stuff in the way. And if you're working with UI elements in this updated version of Unity, you can actually hide other things in the way without actually setting them in active, which is really important and keeps debugging from being too difficult. So if you just click this little I over main menu container, it'll hide the main menu container without setting it inactive. So you can see what you're working on better. So now this settings is in the center. I don't really want a title to be in the center. So something I can do is change its anchor point. And I would want to change it to be anchored to the top of its container. And this just lets me change the position as well with regards to the center. 40, that's not what I want. Like 40 or something, anything like that. So if our game scene changes size this way, it'll stay pinned to the top, which is good.
Also set the pivot Y to 1, or pivot, yeah.
Yeah, you can also set the,
and then make it 0. So
yeah, you also set it to 1, and then set this to 0, and it will be pinned to the exact top.
So that's why modifying the pivot is
Yeah. Yeah. It just makes the numbers more clear, I guess, if you want to have like maintain some margin type, margin size. All right, so now we have this. I'm going to briefly hide it, and then bring the main menu container back, and go back to the settings button. So we have. Oh, and actually, you can just go ahead and set your settings container to be inactive, and the way you do that is by clicking on settings container and then clicking on the checkbox here. So it just won't appear in the game at all when you play it. All right, so if we go back to settings, and if we were to play this again, it would still, nothing would be different. As soon as we make this inactive, there's nothing on the screen. But we can add more things to the on-click functionality. You can add as many functions as you want, which makes things really, really easy to add like super custom functionality without having to write any code. Anyway, so I'm assuming you could probably guess what we would want to happen now, right? We want the settings container to actually appear. And we do it the exact same way we made the main menu container disappear. So we drag the settings container into the spot that we made after clicking the plus, which just adds another spot for the on-click. Click on the function selection, go to game object, and then click on set active. But this time we check it, which is just saying we want it to activate. And when we play, hopefully it'll work and we'll have a menu pop up. So if we click on settings now, wow, it deactivated the main menu container and it activated the settings container. Perfect, that's exactly what we wanted. Cool. So, but you'll notice there's no way to get back. You can add a back button the exact same way you set up the settings button. And we can just do that really quick by setting this active again, just so you can see it again. In settings container, go to UI, create a button, Text Mesh Pro. You now have a button. You name this back button, or back, or something like that. I'm gonna hide this. And inside of the back button, you have to go inside to actually access the text. Change the text value to back. There you go. And then you'll see there's no value set in here. But if you want to go back, just click this and do the reverse that you did with the settings button. So take the settings container, go to game object, set active, have it be an empty checkbox, so it'll set settings container inactive. Grab the menu container, drag in here, game object, set active, true. And if we set this back inactive so it doesn't show up whenever we're playing, it will, settings, and we have this button, back. We have this back. Wow, so now we can just go back and forth. Very neat, very cool. And there's also different kinds of UI things that you have access to. I can show those really quick, and it'll also be an introduction to using scripts with your UI elements. So in addition to this back button, in a settings menu, you might want to have something like a volume slider maybe. That's generally something important, and I think something we require for the VGDev games at least. And there's actually a preset slider. You go in here, where is slider? Slider creates a slider. And I'll just move it to below here. And currently it's just, a slider. It doesn't do anything. If we go to the settings, it didn't. I forgot to hide this again. If we go to settings now, we can interact with it. We can move it around, but it doesn't actually do anything. But similar to the button, it has a slider script with a on something happening space where you can add your own functions or references to other objects. The difference with this, though, is that it's not a Boolean value. You'll see on the buttons when you create them, it's on. Actually, toggles are a Boolean value, but for sliders, this is actually going to be like a float value, and the float value is going to be defined by this min and max that you give it. It's default set to some value between 0 and 1, and it'll have like some decimal point value for sliding in between here. And so you might say like, okay, I can't do like a binary action or just a single action based on moving this. Why would I want to? That wouldn't make any sense. So to mess around with doing a little bit of scripting, how about we make a script called settings behavior or something like that. That sounds good. And inside of settings behavior, it will have the default mono behavior set up in here. And if we want to do something with that value we get from the slider, which the value it returns is the percentage location it's at whenever you mess with it, we can just make a function to do that. So let's do slider change. And to get access to it from that menu in the inspector, you just need to make sure your one parameter is a float. Slider value. And since we don't have any volume stuff set up right now, just to show that there's interaction happening, let's just print the slider value to the console. And the way you do that is capital D debug, capital L log,
Just do
parentheses. Oh, can you do a print?
Yeah, just print. Any monitor behaviors have access to print, which is just that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I don't know anything. Is it capital P or lowercase p?
Lowercase.
Okay. And then you can just put in slider value. Value. Boom. Save this. Go here. And now you actually, so the way you're allowed to use these areas, does it actually, would this need to be attached to
It
it?
needs to be on it.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, so.
Somewhere.
Yeah, so your script actually has to be attached to a game object that's in the game in order to be able to use those functions.
I wonder if you could do like a static.
I'm not sure, but generally you're going to have the script that you want to use attached to another object. You can see I'm doing something similar in menu items. I have this main menu button script here that has all of the functions I want to access. And so for my buttons in here, I've dragged the main menu items object into here, and then I have access to that script.
Now, you can put the script on the button itself.
Yeah, you can put the script on the button itself, which is what I will be doing here. So I'm going to drag my settings behavior onto the slider. So you see it showed up below here. And then now what you would do is basically drag the slider onto itself in the on value changed. If you open the function, you can now see settings behavior is in here. There's a bunch of default stuff you have access to, which all of these I recommend looking at them because you might end up writing a function that just literally does the thing in here.
Function public.
Oh no, I didn't. Okay. Yeah, that's important. If you don't explicitly state if a function is public, it defaults to being private, and you don't have access to it in the inspector. Unless, does that work with? No, that only works with fields. I'll get back to that in a second. But anyway, so now we've made it public. If we go into here, come on, that's not what I did. Go into here, settings behavior, slider change. Is that how that works? That should be how it works. Okay. Oh no, I have to select, I think I have to select the dynamic. I have to select settings behavior. Yeah, okay. So the reason this didn't work is because these are static parameters, meaning it'll set itself to whatever value you actually have manually set in here, which is not what we want for the slider. So if you want to have some reactive input, you actually need to make sure it's under the subheading dynamic. So you select that, you'll notice the area to put a number goes away. That's because the slider script is inputting that information itself dynamically, not statically. So now, I'm not even going to bother switching between these just so you can see this. Now, if you go to console, you can see when I drag this, the number reacts. And this isn't like anything you would do in an actual game. You'd have no reason to just print a number, I guess. But you can see how information that you set up or obtain through the UI, you can just put that into code somewhere and use it for literally anything you'd want to. So say if you were making a minigame, you could use a minigame slider to control the position in world space of some object, or control maybe some weird puzzle where you have to align all of the, the game you made last semester with the sliders, aligning the pitches of things. So yeah, you'd have to be creative, I guess, to come up with all the different things you could do with it, but it's...
Having a platformer, but you have to mess with the UI slider to move the platform.
Yeah.
Right.
And I guess we could also show off another basic UI element. The toggle, that's what I was talking about with the binary Boolean value. This will be, what did I show last time with this? Oh, right, okay, I know what I could show with this. So I'm just going to move this over here. If I hide this, okay. So with a toggle, you could do, it's similar to a button, kind of, but it has the properties of the slider as well, where you can put in like a dynamic value, so you could get a function that takes in a Boolean, and it'll execute that function with whatever Boolean your toggle is being set to. So if we wanted a toggle to, I don't know, toggle access to an area or toggle going back with this button, what you do is you find this onValueChanged area thing again. Let's say you wanted to prevent somebody from going back if they have the toggle turned on. You drag the back button in there, and then you could go to button, and there's, again, dynamic bool, so it'll react to the actual Boolean value that gets triggered whenever you're doing that toggle, and then set it to interactable. So this will toggle whether or not you can interact with the back button. And this is just another example of something you don't even have to write code for. But so if you click this toggle, it's currently checked, so I can actually go back. If I click it off, you'll notice I'm clicking this, nothing's happening. Wow, interactions, woo, wee, wah. Things are happening. And if I click it back on, or reactively do it, I can go back, bam, bam, wow. Very basic settings, UI stuff. I know that was very quick and very complicated and very poorly explained, but I basically have to reteach myself this every time I mess around with the Unity UI because it's such a pain. And they're actually working on a preview package that changes the Unity UI to have more of a HTML, CSS setup, so you can make they call it like a UXML, but it's essentially HTML, and you can assign them with styling sheets and stuff like that. It's all in preview mode, so we couldn't teach it because it's really buggy.
Something tells me it might never come out.
I hope it comes out. Please, God, come out. But yeah, so does anybody have any questions of if you've been messing around with UI and you're stuck on something or unsure, or even just I explained something weird and you want more clarification? Does anybody have any questions? All right, well, cool.
Keep working on those mini games.
Yeah, so now we're done with the main tutorial part of it. If anybody has any mini game stuff that they've been working on and want to ask, you're leaving now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So if anybody wants to, well, I'm going to end the stream now. Goodbye, everybody. Oh, this camera was not set up right.
Well, yeah.